All right, and good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Gonzalez. I'm here with Brian Puente, and we're the two Adobe evangelists here on the university campus. So thank you for joining us. We're here to talk about using Photoshop to combine images into one, which is what we call compositing. So this resource page is a kind of asynchronous place you can visit to revisit and relearn what we talk about today. If you scroll down right here where the agenda is, later this week, we'll post the recording from this video if you want a reminder about how to do anything. And yeah, everything we talk about is in here, but you don't need to follow along on this site. This is just a reference for later. So hopefully you were able to download the files. We're going to do a short introduction. I love the cat on the keyboard, Brian. That's excellent communication. And who here has used Photoshop before? Let's see some hand emojis, yeses.
Yes.
All right. So we got some people. So I'm going to do a quick little intro to the workspace, get us all on the same page, and then that's okay. You've opened it, you've been around, maybe you've gotten frustrated with it before. I still get frustrated with Photoshop sometimes. And that's okay. It's all about practice and knowing the steps that it takes to get something done. So if you want to follow along, the first file we're going to open is 01, introduce interface. To open a file in Photoshop, there's a handful of ways. If it's a .psd, usually double clicking just sends it into Photoshop. But if you want to be certain, you can right click, open with, and tell it to use Photoshop. You can also drag it to the icon on your taskbar or dock bar, or you can go file and open in Photoshop itself. Those are all valid functional ways. I can't get this window to go. So we're going to open file 01. And I'm going to make my screen nice and big. So this is Photoshop, and this is what we call the Photoshop workspace, the entire window that has our image, our tools, our panels, and our settings. And the first area I'd like to draw your attention to is on the left-hand side. It's called the toolbar. And all of these tools are what we'll call mouse tools that you click on them on your mouse and then you click on your image to do something, generally speaking. So for example, this move tool lets me move a specific layer around. The brush tool lets me paint a color. So I could go here to this color picker and choose red, and I can paint a color onto my pixels. Also take notice that many tools, let's see if I can zoom in here. Many tools have this little arrow on the bottom right. That means it's a drawer, kind of like a tool chest. And if you click and hold, there will be other tools that are related to it. Also, if you ever want to know your keyboard shortcuts, if you just hold your mouse there, it will tell you. So to use the move tool, the keyboard shortcut is V. To use the type tool, the keyboard shortcut is T, which can help you work faster. Okay, so speaking about tools, when you choose a specific tool, this window area up here will change. This is a dynamic settings menu, if you'll call it. We call it the tool options bar. It's great to hear, Regina. The tool options bar will be settings for whichever tool you have selected. So if I have the type tool, I can choose my font, the font style, size, alignment, and the font color all in this area. If I have my brush tool selected, I can choose my brush style, the size and hardness, the opacity, and a few other things. So if your tools aren't doing quite what you expect, you might check your settings up here. Okay, and at the end of this is another, this is a static part that doesn't change based on the tool. but we actually have this button to collaborate now. If you've got the later version, the latest version, you can invite people to collaborate on your files. We have a search function, but what I would like you to do is click this second to last button. It's a rectangle with a little toolbar, if you will. It says choose a workspace, because my workspace is set to photography. And that just is an arrangement of panels. I think, in my opinion, the default one hides some of the things that we want to have access to right away. And it has a little bit more clutter than I like. So I like switching to photography. If you're following along with me, it'll be easier to see. Okay, so we'll stick to photography. And so if you notice, it's usually set to essentials. So we'll click here and go to photography. And here on the right-hand side, it might be set to libraries. You've got this tab, you can switch between libraries and adjustment. Libraries is a way you can access files that you've saved on the Creative Cloud, and also things that you have licensed, depending on how you are organized. I have these other libraries I can access. And adjustments are these non-destructive adjustment layers that we can put on an image to change the brightness, contrast, the overall aesthetic. We can affect the color, the pixels, and everything. And then underneath here is kind of the biggest theme for today. Today, our theme is really getting comfortable with using layers, rearranging layers, cutting things out of specific images and combining them. And all of that is going to depend on layers, selections, masks, and what we'll call transformations. And then the final piece of our workspace is here in the middle, and that's what we call the canvas. And the canvas is this rectangle. So I just went and hid all of my layers. It's the rectangle or square in Photoshop where you can place pixels and make a design of some sort, make an image. So this space, when it's a checkerboard, what that means is that there's nothing there. It means empty pixels. And generally, when you make a new document, it starts you out with just a solid white layer on the bottom. So just be aware that checkerboard, when you save, depending on how you save it, will either turn into a transparent part of an image, or it'll just become white. Okay, let's bring all my layers back. Do we have any questions about the general workspace? And by the way, questions are very welcome and encouraged. You can type them in, you can unmute and ask. Brian and I are here to answer any and all questions. We might say, great question, let's answer it at the end, but we want to help you get your answers. Okay, so now that we've kind of gotten to know our workspace, the final area is the menu at the top. There's even more treasures up here. There's filters, there's automatic selecting things that we'll play with, and there's file, save, and export. So, okay. Now what I'd like to talk about before we jump into these layers is two of my favorite keyboard shortcuts, because an important thing when compositing is being able to get in close and zoom back out and navigate your image quickly and effectively, so that you can work precisely. So my keyboard shortcuts to navigate an image are Command plus or Command or Control plus to zoom in. And you can zoom in until you see a pixel grid if you want. Command or Control minus to zoom out. And if you're taking a moment to write these down or anything like that, they have actually been written for you right here. We aren't going to use all of these today, but these are some of the most common ones. All right, command minus to zoom, command or control minus to zoom out. And depending on how big your image is, the percentage will change. Oh, that's interesting. And let's say you want to fit it to your window. The keyboard shortcut for that is command or control 0. So that fits it to the window. Yeah, and Brian just put that in the chat for us. Thank you very much. So those three are how you resize your view. You're not changing the image size. You're just pulling it closer or further away. And then when you're in close, if you're on a laptop, you can use the trackpad to move it around. But I use a separate mouse and keyboard. So to get a similar effect, I use what's called the hand tool. So when you hold spacebar, you'll see my tool goes from this paintbrush. If I hold spacebar, it turns into a hand. And if I click and drag, I'm still holding space. I can pan around my image. And it even has a little bit of gravity to it, so, or inertia. So if you throw it and let go, it kind of keeps going a little bit, which I think is pretty satisfying. All right, so that is navigating our image with some keyboard shortcuts. Now let's talk about our layers. So as I said a moment ago, layers are kind of the key feature for what we're doing today, and I think for all of the Photoshop magic. And layers, I like to think of a pizza. Sometimes people talk about sandwiches, which are also delicious, but I like a pizza because it's kind of a top-down view, and pizzas are layered, right? You have your bread, that's your bottommost layer, and then you call it bread? Crust is the right word, I apologize. And then you have your sauce and cheese and your toppings. And if you change the order of those, when you look at it from top down, things will cover one another. And that's the same idea with my layers over here. So right now, my bottommost layer is this layer called stars. And in your layer panel, these little eyeballs indicate whether you're showing or hiding it. So if I click on the topmost layer and hide it by clicking the eye, I can see the layers underneath. So right now, my topmost layer is a very big image that is hiding everything underneath it. So let's hide that again. My bottommost layer, my crust, is the stars. So if I hide that, I see all these other images. And if I keep hiding layers, we'll see how many separate images we actually have here. So this image that appears to us as a two-dimensional image is actually separated into 9 separate layers. So let's see what happens then. Let's say we want to put the astronaut on this bed here. Let's click on the astronaut layer. Let's grab our move tool just to have it ready. And right now, if I click and move, I can actually have my astronaut show up in the window because this top layer has holes in it. Now, I'm moving the astronaut layer because that's the layer I have selected. If I switch it to room, I'm moving the room around. And I'm going to tell you one of my other favorite keyboard shortcuts, Command or Control Z. And you can press that as many times as you like to keep stepping backwards. Okay, so let's get the astronaut, instead of peeking through the door, let's put them on the bed. So on the astronaut layer, I click and I move it above the room. And now the astronaut is in the room. And that's really our basic idea of layers, is that the order matters, and also whether it's a complete image or the background has been cut out, or removed will affect the way they combine. I could take this astronaut and I could maybe have them take a nap on the bed. So to do that, I want to make them a little smaller and rotate. And that's called a free transformation, free transform. And to do that, you go Edit, Free Transform. You can also press Command or Control T. So I'm going to press Command T on my Mac. And we get this very familiar bounding box. If you've played around in PowerPoint or Google Slides, anytime you add an element to your slideshow, it gets this little box. And the corners, these little boxes, are how we resize an image. And by default, Photoshop doesn't let you stretch or squash an image. I'm sorry, my dog is a very loud wooden toy right now. So by default, you can't ruin the dimensions, the ratio of an image. If you need to do that, which you shouldn't really ever, you have to hold shift, but let's not. And so we can make them smaller. We can make them bigger too, but you're not going to get a high quality image as you keep going bigger and bigger because you're asking Photoshop to make up pixels. I'm happy to hear when keyboard shortcuts are life-changing. I completely agree. So let's go ahead and rotate them as well. So I can shrink them, and then as my mouse is outside of the box, I get a curved arrow. That means I can click and rotate however I like. And they're just gonna lay like this. Very comfy. This is how I sleep. And when you're done transforming, you hit enter on the keyboard, or there's a little check mark up in the top menu. Or if you don't like what you did, you can hit escape or the little cancel button. Do we have questions about moving our layers around and free transforming? We're going to do quite a bit of this today, so I'm going to move on to the other things now if we have questions. Okay, excellent. All right, if you like, you can go ahead and close this 01 file. You don't need to save it. You can if you're really happy with what you did to it. And the next file we're going to open up is called 03, which is selection compositing basics. So again, if it's a PSD, you can open it just by double clicking, but I'm going to right click open with Adobe Photoshop just to be sure. Oh, I actually want to open my space file back up. Apologies. Okay. I like to open two files so that you can see how your workspace manages having multiple files open, and it does that with these tabs, just like in our internet browsers. So this tab is the interface file, and this tab is my egg. Same rules apply. I can zoom in, Command or Control minus, zoom out, and Command Control 0 to fit it to the screen. So let's say we wanted to do something simple, like we want to cut the egg out and put the word egg behind the egg. I hope that makes sense. So yes, that's a great point. As Brian said, if your computer feels like it's slowing down or struggling, definitely close any open documents that you're not using. And I also recommend, if you have any other programs open that you're not using right now, to close them, especially, well, I was going to say Chrome, but you might have the resource page open. But Photoshop it loves your resources, your memory, and scratch disk space. So the more it gets, the happier it works. Okay, so let's say we want to select this egg. We want to cut out its background, and we want to be able to put a word behind it. So to do that, there's actually some really nice tools, but I'll show you. You don't have to do it this way, but a lot of people, when they first learned Photoshop, the only tool we knew was the lasso. So we'd grab the lasso and we'd go like this, and we'd try our best to select just the egg. And then we'd say, okay, I've got an egg. We'd grab our move tool, click and drag, and put it in space. You might get this color space warning, that's okay. And look at my egg. It looks like I cut it out with scissors, right? Very poorly. And we can get much better selections with this with even less work than what I just did with the lasso. So today we won't be using the lasso at all. If you love the lasso, that's great. Okay, so what I drew with the lasso is called a selection. And a selection is made up of what we call marching ants. And this gives Photoshop instructions to ignore anything outside of those marching ants that I drew. So with the lasso, you draw a complete loop, and anything inside your loop is what Photoshop is interested in now. There are other tools like the marquee that draws a rectangular selection, or if you click and hold, an elliptical selection, which unfortunately is not, our egg isn't perfectly elliptical like this. So you can make selections in specific geometric shapes as well. But these marching ants tell us that Photoshop is now only interested in what is inside that dotted space. So for example, if I were to grab my paintbrush, and let's not paint with red, that doesn't make sense. Let's paint with blue. And I was trying to draw a smiley face on this egg. I'm painting, I'm clicking, but nothing is happening. But if I go inside my marching ants, I can paint. And once I hit the edge, I can't paint. So that's what selections do. They make Photoshop focus. Command or Control Z to undo. And there's a lot you can do once you make a selection. You can duplicate that part. You can tell it to cut out everything but what you selected. You can add an adjustment for just a selected portion. But let's start simple here. Let's select the egg and remove its background. All right. So I'm going to click on the background layer, and I'm going to unlock it by clicking this little lock. So hopefully you're able to unlock your layer 0. And then I'm going to open up my properties panel, which is these 3 lines with sliders on them. And hopefully you'll see quick actions, and there's 2 of them. There's select subject, and there's remove background. These 2 quick actions are really nice starting points for making a selection and removing unwanted parts of an image. But they are not magic, so it might not get you the perfect edge you're looking for. So let's see what happens when I click select subject. It goes and it finds what it thinks is the subject. That's pretty good. If I click, I'm going to get rid of my marching ants by pressing Command or Control D or going select, deselect. If I click remove background, it's just doing select subject and then applying a mask. So let's see what happens here. Remove background. It selected my egg and it removed the background. And if you look at our layer now, it actually has something new. It has this additional rectangle that is all black and then white in the center in the shape of an egg. And that's what we call a mask. And when you have a selection and you put a mask on it, it will hide everything that is outside of your selection. So if I hold Option and click on this mask, this is what Photoshop is seeing. It's saying everywhere it's black, hide pixels. Everywhere it's white, show pixels. So this is what we call non-destructive editing, because the pixels are not deleted, they're hidden. They're at 0 opacity. So I can turn this mask off whenever I want. If I hold Shift and click on it, my background comes back. If I right click and delete the mask, my background returns. So masks are a much nicer way of working because they are forgiving. If you make a mistake, you can fix it later. But if you delete pixels, if you destroy them, sometimes your only resource is to start over. Okay, and just for fun, I'm going to undo that again because I love having fun. And let's just say we select subject. You can also apply a mask yourself by going to the bottom of your layers. If you look next to the letters FX, there's a rectangle with a circle in it. It's kind of picture like a sheet with a hole cut in the center, like it's masking out parts of it. If you click that, you can put a mask on an image. And when you have a selection, the mask will automatically fill everything else with black and hide it. Any questions about using this select and mask function? We all have some floating eggs right now. Yeah, and like Brian said, if you alter option click on the mask, you can see what Photoshop is being instructed. If you shift click on a mask, you can disable it temporarily.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
When I selected the subject, it gave me this odd shaped little, like it's the oval, but then it kind of goes out and like selecting part of the shadow, I think. Is there
Yeah,
a
it did
way
that
to
for me too,
adjust-
right?
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so
Is there
I
a way
mean,
to adjust that so it's
there
clean?
is. This is what's really great about masks. If you are on your layer
Mhm.
and you make sure you have the mask selected, not the photo, you can see how I
Okay.
can click between one and the other. Make sure you're on the mask. And if you grab your paintbrush, this is how you edit a mask, which is by painting with black to remove more and painting with white to reveal more. So my colors are right here. If you don't see black and white, you can press D on the keyboard.
Okay.
And to switch between black and white, you press X on the keyboard. And so here I'm painting with black. I'm on my brush, and if I paint with black, I'm hiding my egg. If I paint with white, I'm bringing my egg back. And you'll notice that if I keep painting, the background starts to show up too.
Okay.
So basically what you do is you get in there, you make your brush really small, which I'm going to talk about our brush with the next file. And you can go and clean it up yourself.
Yeah, just blow it up and okay.
Yeah. But you can also refine your selection beforehand too, which we're going to talk about as well. We're gonna party with a few things, but that's a really
Okay.
great question to point out because
Thank you.
it's not magic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love to hear that you guys are getting some time savers. Okay, let's put the word egg here or whatever you want. I'm going to grab the type tool, which is T on the keyboard to switch to. I'm going to click once on my canvas and I'm going to type egg, exclamation point. And then I'm going to hit this check mark to commit my text. You will see text is its own layer on Photoshop as well. So I can move it around, I can free transform it. So if I grab my move tool, I can grab the word egg. And if I want it to be bigger, I can press Command or Control T and make it bigger. There's like 12 different ways to make type bigger in Photoshop. Free transform is probably the fastest. Okay. And again, the proportions are constrained, so it keeps that ratio. When I'm done free transforming, I press enter or I hit the check mark up here. And because this is a layered composite, I can easily move the egg in front of the word egg. It's a little confusing sounding. So I'll just take the egg layer, the text egg layer, and move it to the bottom. Now, let's say I really like that red background and I want to have the red background, but the word egg between the background and the actual egg itself. I would do that by copying my picture layer and moving it to the bottom and taking the mask off. So let's see what that looks like. If I go back to my picture layer, I'm going to duplicate it. There's a few ways. My favorite way is to click on it and press Command or Control J. You could also click and drag it to the new layer icon that's next to the garbage can. And there's a few other ways. You could also hold Option, but so now I have this layer and it still has a mask. So I'm going to right click on the mask and delete it. And then I'm going to move this layer to the very bottom. So I have my layer with the egg on top, my text in between, and my background at the bottom. Are there any questions about egg. And again, you're going to see what we're doing today. We're going to do the same thing over and over again in slightly different ways. So we're going for repetition and practice here. All right, let's open the next image then. So now I'm going to open 4. There's no 2. You might have noticed that, but that's okay. So we'll open brush basics because I do want to talk about manipulating a mask with just a paintbrush. Some people like to work that way. And Kim kind of gave us a preview on that with her question, which is great. So if you open file 4, brush basics, you'll be greeted by this door, I guess a castle door maybe. And if we look at our layers, we'll see there's actually 2 layers here. There's a door, and underneath it, if I hide the door layer, we'll see a lady in a forest, which I might be wrong, but when I look at it, it looks like a composite to me. It looks like she was cut out and placed in there. Something about the light not wrapping around her, I don't know. Either way, it looks pretty good. They gave her a pretty nice shadow down here. And the effect we want to achieve here is we want to open this doorway to show the forest and the lady. So there's a few ways to do that. You could use a selection tool, which we're not going to talk about until the next file, so let's not. Let's just do it the painterly way. Let's put a mask on here first and then paint with black to open the door up, which what we're actually doing is hiding those doors. So again, on our layer panel, I don't have a selection, which is fine. I'm going to go to the bottom and click on the circle, the rectangle with a circle in it, and that's going to add a mask. And you'll notice this time nothing disappeared because, well, there was no selection. There was nothing to tell Photoshop to make black and make white. But now what I can do is I can mask it myself. So I put a mask on there and I make sure that I have the mask selected, not the door, because if you're on the door, all you're doing is painting with blue pixels or whatever. But if you're on the mask, you are masking and revealing parts of your image. So super important thing to pay attention to. It will happen to you. You will paint on the wrong part by mistake. I still do it all the time. Okay, so we're on our mask. I switched to my paintbrush. The keyboard shortcut is B. I pressed D on the keyboard to set my colors to white and black. And I'm going to press X on the keyboard to swap black as my current color. Now, right now, my brush is teeny tiny, and it has what we call a soft edge. And I like the soft edge, but I want to make it bigger. So the next keyboard shortcut is how to resize our brush. And this is for any tool that uses, a brush. It's the bracket keys, the open and close bracket next to the letter P on your keyboard. So the open bracket, the left one, makes your brush smaller, and the closed bracket makes your brush bigger. So what I want to show you is my big brush. When I click once, it fully hides at the center, and then it gradually fades out. And that's what we call feathering or a soft edge. And that setting you can find by either right-clicking while on your brush tool or going to your brush settings here. And that's called the hardness setting. So if I set the hardness to 0, it's going to be fully sharp at the edge, not soft or feathered. And it's going to look like I used scissors to try and cut this part of my picture out. So here we have on the left, 0% hardness, on the right, 100% hardness, which is interesting. It's slightly smaller than my brush. I don't know why. Might be a zoom thing. And let's just, for fun, let's see 50% hardness. So you can see this change between them. Your level of hardness is going to depend on what you're trying to do. 0% hardness in a big brush is a really nice way to blend two different things together. For this door, I'll probably use like 50% hardness. And then another thing that I like to do, other than just change the size of my brush and the hardness of the edge, I also like to change the opacity of my brush. So right now my brush is set to 100% opacity. And if you look up here in the toolbar menu, we have opacity, 100%. You can't right click, but I mean, I'm going to throw a lot of keyboard shortcuts at you all because I live by them. You can change your brush hardness by pressing a number key. So for example, if I press 5, my opacity is now 50%. If I press 1, it's now 10%. If I press 0, it's 100% again. So that's a really quick way to change your brush hardness. And I like to paint something like this at around 80% around the edges so that I build it up. But you could just do it at 100. So let's go ahead and open this doorway up. I'm at 50% hardness, 80% opacity, and I'm going to start with a big brush in the middle here, and it's going to take a few, I'm going to have to paint over it a couple times to get it to 100%. And then as I get towards the edges, I'm going to make my brush smaller with the bracket, and I'm going to remove parts of the doorway. Now I'd probably work slower and more carefully. I might even use selection tools to help me with this, but you can pretty quickly remove the doorway. And you'll notice I made some mistakes. So what I'll do is press X and switch to painting with white to bring back parts that I accidentally cut out. And I could go nice and big and just, oops, X again. And I could bring this all the way out so that it's kind of a little more like that. And that's kind of the basic idea. And it kind of like make the leaves pile up on the door a little here and a little over here. And now we have this doorway that leads to a magic forest. So you can do it all with brushes if you like, but knowing how to use selections as well is a really nice way to save time, which I'm going to demonstrate super quick. You don't need to follow along for this, but you could. I'm going to delete the layer mask. That's okay. We haven't actually made any real selections. All we've done is had Photoshop make them for us. And we're going to talk about selecting for the rest of the workshop. So, but if I wanted to select this doorway, I can use this quick select tool. It's the 4th tool on my toolbar. The keyboard shortcut is W. And the way this tool works is it's a brush, so you can make your brush bigger or smaller. And you just paint inside what you would like to select, and it tries to find the edges. And what would happen now is I would probably put a mask on it, and you're going to find I get the opposite of what I want. But then I can click on my mask, and over here in the properties, I can invert it. And that kind of got the party started for me. So now I could grab my brush and bring out the rest of it if I wanted. There's really no right or wrong way to approach how you mask. If you're using masks, then you're generally doing it right. But you can use selections to get there. But it wasn't perfect, right? So this happened here, and it might have a bit of a hard edge, but I can bring that back with my white brush. But it's really, it's not too bad, if you ask me. Let's go and find little weird bits. Okay, questions about this? I'm gonna drink some water, give you a moment if you have a question. Yeah, well put, Brian. The best composites usually are using a combination of approaches. Okay, so here's what we're going to spend the rest of this time doing. We're going to put a bear in the desert, give him a hat, some sunnies, and a water bottle, and put the U of A logo on there. And we're going to learn a couple of new things and practice some things that we've already seen. So we're going to open up the file called Sonoran Desert. Oh, sorry, 1 second. Oops. Okay. Anyway, so we're going to open the desert, and we can go ahead and close the other files so that our computers are happy. So I'm just pressing Command or Control W to close them and saying don't save. And then let's go ahead and open up the bear. So we're going to right click on the file called bear down, open with Photoshop. Just a heads up, some people, if you wanted to drop an image in here, you can click and drag it onto the file, which I just put a second desert on there. But we want separate files. So we're going to right click, open with Adobe Photoshop. All right, and we have this handsome bear here. And what we're going to do is remove the background, move him over to the desert, and make him smaller. So to remove the background, we'll use some of our auto tools. First step is to unlock the layer. And then just click remove background in your quick actions. I'd give the resulting selection kind of a C-. If we have time, I will, I'll show you how to clean up the edge. But for now, we'll call it good enough because we're learning and practicing. So again, what I did was I unlocked the layer. And then in the properties panel here, I clicked remove background. And now I'm going to grab my move tool, which is V on the keyboard. And that lets me move the bear around. And to move one layer to another document, you're going to click and hold. Don't let go of your click. Go up to the other tab. When it switches over, you're going to move your mouse down, and then you're going to let go of your click. And now we have this big bear here, looking pretty good. And now we need to make our bear smaller because this is too big. So I'm going to press Command or Control T. And here's where our little keyboard shortcuts are pretty handy. I'm going to press Command or Control 0. And that will show me the whole bounding box of the bear. And I'll shrink them down. Zoom back in so I can get an idea of where it's standing. I think I'll put it right here. When I'm done free transforming and I'm happy, I hit the check mark or I hit enter. All right, I saw some thumbs up. Did we all get our bear in there? All right, the next thing we'll do is give our bear a hat. That sounds good. So I'm going to go back to my composite folder and I'm going to right click on hat, not Sunny's, right click on hat and open with Photoshop again. And we're going to steal this lady's hat. And for this, we can't just do remove background because it'll bring the lady with us too. So what we're going to do is select it with the quick select tool. So I'm going to press W on my keyboard or click on the fourth tool down. It's a paintbrush with marching ants coming out of it. And this tool, the way it works is you want to make it smaller than what you're selecting, but you don't want to make it tiny. So I use the brackets. and you just paint inside what you want to select. And you might be able to hear, I'm just clicking around. I'm not holding my click and dragging, so you don't have to do it all in one fell swoop. And as I get more of the hat, I might end up with a little bit of the hair, which I'll show you how to pull that back after I get the whole hat. Okay. So it might look cute if I gave the bear some hair, but I don't really want to. So what I'm going to do now is on my keyboard, I'm going to hold Alt or Option, Alt on Windows, Option on Mac. And you'll see that plus sign turn into a minus. And what that means is you want to deselect some stuff. So I'll just click on things I don't want selected to pull those marching ants in. And we're going to put our hat behind the bear. So it's not that important if I have a little bit of hair still, but you kind of do this back and forth. Now I deselected a little bit too much of my hat, so I'll let go of Option or Alt and bring it back in a little bit. Were we able to select our hat? And I'll throw a quick that's fine. That's good enough. We'll clean it up if we need to. All of the images we're working with today, we downloaded from Adobe Stock, which you might notice this image has a really nice one color background, which makes selecting the hat a lot easier than it would be if she was out in the desert or something. So if you haven't requested access to Adobe Stock to download files that you know are high quality and you have the right to use, I suggest you do that. We can talk about it more at the end. Okay, so hopefully your hat is selected. And now what we're going to do is put a mask on it. So at the bottom of our layers, we're going to click the rectangle with a circle. And we should end up with just a hat. And just like the bear, thanks, Brian. Brian put an Adobe Stock link in there. I'll click and hold on the hat with my move tool. So I press V on the keyboard. I'll go over to the Sonoran Desert layer, come down and let go of my click. And you'll see my hat's a little bit too big. So I'm going to press Command or Control T again. I can't even see the bounding box, but I know I entered free transform. So I'll press Command or Control 0. And we'll go ahead and shrink it down. This is one thing about masking, is that when you keep the original pixel information, the size of it remains. Okay. Sorry, I was getting messages about my baby, but he's okay now. All right, so I'll shrink my hat down. I can't really see from this far away, so I'm going to zoom in, Command Control Plus. And my bear has a hat. I think it's a little too big still. And the reason I'm not entirely concerned about the hat inside is because for this particular composite, I thought it was more fun to put the hat behind the bear and have the little ears coming out. So let's go ahead and take a moment here. We're going to get organized and responsible. Okay, no worries. We got the hat selected. How do we get rid of the girl? So we have the selection. If you look at the bottom of your layers, we're going to apply a mask by hitting the rectangle with a circle in it. It says add a mask. Click. And that's what you end up with. Excellent. And then you click and drag it over. You Command or Control T and shrink it down. You might have to press Command or Control 0 so you can see that bounding box. So it's a really good practice to save your file regularly and to name your layers, because the more layers you end up with, the easier it can be to get lost in them, and you can lose time and motivation when you're working. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and name these two layers. The top one, I'll just double click where it says layer 2 and name it hat. And then the bear, I'll double click where it says layer 1 and name it bear. And now I can take the hat layer and move it behind the bear. And it's not perfect. There's a little bit we need to do to make it look like it's actually on his head, which if time allows, I'll show you. But for now, we're going to just get the whole piece and then refine. Okay, so we named our layers. That's good. But let's go ahead and save our file as well. And we're going to save this as a Photoshop document first, because you want to keep your layers. So Photoshop documents will have layers and it saves what we call non-destructively. So let's just go File, Save, or Command or Control S. The first time you do that to a file that hasn't been saved, it's going to ask you where you want to save it and what you'd like to name it and which format. The format is Photoshop. The name is up to you. I'm going to name it Desert Bear Composite. Beautiful. And it's going to save it in my compositing folder, which is fine. So when you save this, you should end up with a new file in there called Desert Bear Composite. The name changed of the tab. It's no longer Sonoran Desert. It's Desert Bear Composite. And if you look, we'll see this file that's a .psd in our folder, which is good. That's what we want. And when we finish, I'll show you how you save out a flattened file as a JPEG. Do we have any questions about naming layers, saving as a PSD, getting the hat on the bear? Excellent. And if you have them, ask them when they come up. No big deal. All right, the next thing we're going to do is give them some sunglasses. So I'm going to right click on Sunny's, open with Adobe Photoshop. Command or Control 0 to fit in the canvas here in the view. And with this one, if we were to unlock it and remove the background, yeah, I didn't do a better job. Okay, you will see that it ended up removing parts of my frame here, and it kept some bits of white. So what we're going to try, we could go clean it up with our paintbrush. We could use a white brush, but I'd like to show you my personal favorite way of making selections and masks, and that's with a workspace called Select and Mask. So you don't even have to unlock a layer to do it, but mine's already unlocked from before. So we're not going to do any selections. We're going to go to Select at the menu up top, and we're going to enter what's called Select and Mask mode. Keyboard shortcut is Alt-Option-Command-R. And this is going to open up a separate window, or as we like to call them, a workspace. And this space is dedicated just for making selections and refining your selection. Maybe by default, you can go ahead and check that you're on the same view as me. So on the right-hand side in the properties area, there's this view dropdown. I am set to what's called onion skin. And the opacity, the transparency, it drives me crazy that they call them different things, is set to 50%. And this onion skin mode, what it does is it shows you what is not selected at 50% opacity or whatever you have it set to. And when you start making a selection, it will show them at 100% opacity. So on the left-hand side, we have a familiar tool here, the quick selection tool. So I'm going to make my brush bigger and click on my lenses here. And now those are selected. Yeah, thank you, Brian. Now I'll make my brush a little smaller and I'll just click along the edge, the frames, and I'll select the frames as well. It's usually best to zoom in and pan around while you do this. But this is not a new tool. This is just the quick select tool. We're just using it in a different workspace than before. So you make sure your brush is smaller than what you want to select. If you accidentally get some of the background, you can hold Option and remove it. It just takes a little more painting. Good, I'm glad it's helpful. So we'll keep getting the frames here. This is going to take you, I mean, it takes a lot longer than clicking remove background, right? Because that's just a one and done step. But it really doesn't take too long to select something with this mode. So again, here it brought the background in. I'm going to hold Option to remove it. I'm going to click in here to try and bring this. Actually, I'm going to remove those later anyway, but that's okay. So I'm just holding spacebar to pan around, and I'm just making sure that I get everything I want, and I remove everything I don't want. So here I accidentally got this. I'm going to make my brush smaller with the bracket, hold Option and remove this. There we go. Here I got the background. Is that the edge of the frame? I'm not sure. I don't want that white part, so I'm going to hold Option and click. Oh, oops. Sorry, everyone, I hit enter by mistake. Select the mask. I have to start over. That's annoying. All right, let's work fast here. So hopefully this gives you a chance to make your selections. What I'm going to do is go and select everything and then clean up. That's usually my preferred way to work here. Excellent. Yeah, I'm just humanizing the workshop here. And sometimes it's, it's not a bad idea just to let it get some of what you don't want and then telling it to pull it back again. Sometimes it finds the edges a little differently. This time it's not, so that's okay. Yeah, there we go. It's getting there. Okay. All right, and this, remove this, that's Option. And this selected mask is what we'll call content aware. So as you make selections in one area and deselect, it actually refines the edge in other areas too, which is what you might notice it doing. So as you clean it up, your selection gets better in other areas as well. Okay, let's get this little white bit up. This is what we'll call probably good enough. Whoops. If you want to see your selection in a different way, you can change your view. It might help if I switch my view to on black, and you can see that, ooh, my selection is not actually as good as I thought it was. So I need to go and add these other bits. But again, a little transparency is not a problem. Wow. I think I confused Photoshop. Anyway, I'd spend a little bit of time cleaning this more, but for the sake of time, let's get out of this black view because we're not putting it on black, so you won't notice those edges anyway. Give me this back. Okay, so once you've got your sunglasses selected, you will tell it out here on the right-hand side. You can make adjustments, which we might talk about later if we have time. But just tell it to output to a new layer with a mask. That's right. You could lose a lot of hours finessing a selection, which has happened before. So I chose output to a new layer with a mask, and you'll see it looks pretty good. It duplicated the layer and it put a mask on it. So I still have my original pixel information hiding there. Now we'll grab our move tool, move them over to the Desert Bear composite. And I mean, it looks kind of cool with the bear standing in front of these giant sunglasses, but we want to wear them. So I'm going to press Command or Control T, Command 0 to zoom out, not Shift. Make them smaller, move them. Can you change? You can Yeah, you can't change your layer order. It takes you out of free transform, but let's just move the sunglasses to the top of the layers. Name them sunglasses or sunnies. And you might notice something about my sunglass layer, which sometimes this happens, sometimes it doesn't. The bear doesn't have it this time, and I don't know why, but that's okay. Sometimes our selection gets a little border around it, and you can fix that with your brush. Just grab your brush, paint with black, change your opacity to 100, and just remove that little edge if it drives you crazy, which drives me crazy. Okay, let's put the sunglasses on. So I'm going to go back to my move tool, move them down, Command or Control T, because they're still too big in my opinion. Maybe something like this. Works pretty good. And we're actually going to do a couple things with our mask here too. So I gave him a little rotation because I don't know, he looks like he's turning his head a little bit. And there's two things I want to do. I'm going to remove the little ear parts of the arm so that they just look like they're more in his fur. And I'm going to make his lenses a little transparent so we see the bear's eye through them. And both of those things are done with the mask. So making sure I'm on the mask of the sunglasses layer, I'm going to grab my brush and paint with black to remove these little arms because they just look kind of funky. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my brush fairly big and paint inside the lens just once, one click and go around and in the middle with a lower opacity. I'm going to try 60% opacity, which again, I can press 6 on the keyboard or I can change it up here in the tool options bar. And what I'm doing is painting with not 100% strength. So that means my mask will become translucent. And I think 60% was way too strong. Let's go down to 30%. I don't like that either. Let's go down to 20. That's pretty good. So I'm just clicking once and painting around the outside and in the middle. The reason it's important to only click once is because if you click again, you're making it 40%. And you click again, it's 60 all the way until you completely remove it. So you don't want to do that. Were we able to remove the arms and make the lenses transparent? Kind of. Do you want me to do it again? I'll do it again. So let's check our brush settings here. My brush is set to 50% hardness. The size is 25 pixels and the opacity is 20%. And then I'm on the mask, making sure I'm on the mask, not on the layer, I'm not on the image. And I'm just going to click and move my brush along the outside like this, and then the inside. How was round 2? Okay, I'm gonna put the water bottle in now. We're going to. So hopefully you got the sunglasses. If not, I'm happy to help you shortly because we're towards the end of it anyway here. So let's open up the water bottle layer. We're going to, it's called hydrates. So right click, open with Photoshop. So the layer, the image called hydrate. And this one you can select however you like. I'm going to use the quick select tool and select the water bottle. Pretty good. I'm going to hold Option. You could just remove background. I just want to show you how many different ways you can do the same thing. Okay. And then I'm going to put a mask on it. So remove the background from the water bottle however you like. And let's move it into our composite. Free transform to make it smaller. Zoom in, rotate. That's pretty good. I'm going to name the layer bottle. And what I actually need to do here is I need to get it in the bear's paw. And a lot of people, when they think about compositing that way, what they try and do is cut a shape from the top layer, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, so that it has a hole and it shows the paw underneath it. But it's in my opinion, it's always better to stack things. So what we're actually going to do is make a copy of the bear's paw. We're gonna cut its paw off, copy it, move it above the water bottle. And you'll find that the results from working this way are quicker and better looking. And it's I think an important principle for compositing to use layers to cover other layers instead of trying to cut them to fit each other. Are we ready to select a bear paw? All right, let's give it a shot. We have to make sure we're on the bear layer, and then we're on the bear image, not the mask, on the bear. And let's take a second to hide the bottle layer. I'm going to zoom in. I'm on my bear image, and I'm going to grab my quick select tool. And I'm just going to select the paw. And probably that's enough. Could probably get a better selection, but you know, we'll live with it. Oh, I want to get that claw for sure. There we go. So now what we're going to do, we're not going to put a mask on it, because if we do that, we end up with another vector mask here. That's not what you want. So what we want to do is just duplicate this part of the bear. And we're not even going to mask it. We're just going to copy these pixels over. And we're going to do that the same way we duplicated layers before, by pressing Command or Control J. Or you can right click and go layer via copy. And I have a new layer titled layer 1. It'll stand out to you because it doesn't have a mask. And I'll name it paw. So if I were to Option or Alt click on this layer, it'll hide everything and show only that layer. And we'll see we have just a paw here. Pretty good. I'm going to Option click again. I'm going to bring my water bottle back. And now to get the bottle under the paw, you just need to move your layers around. So I'll just grab the bottle and move it underneath paw. And you'll see it looks surprisingly good. We got little bits of fur coming through, and it's on there. We still need to do little things like add shadows, but that's okay. Okay, the final piece of this composite is to put a U of A logo on the water bottle. And we haven't saved in a while, so let's take a second and save. You can do that by pressing Command or Control S. And because we've already named it and placed it somewhere, it just updates that one. Command Control S to save. Okay, the final piece is the U of A emblem, which I got from the U of A brand site, brand.arizona.edu. You can download a PNG and it will have an empty background already. So we don't need to do any cutting. We're just going to transform and place it. So this time, let's just drop it in our composite. I'm going to click and drag into Photoshop, and it's going to put it right on there. And it's already free transforming. So I'll go ahead and shrink it down. But what I'm going to do is hit enter, zoom in, and then I'm going to free transform again. I guess I didn't have to do that, but that's okay. And what I want to do is size it onto my water bottle and rotate it. But before I'm done rotating, I want to do one little thing called a warp. You'll notice it came in nicely under the paw. If yours isn't, you can move your layers around later. But what we're going to do is curve it a tiny bit. So while in free transform, you right click on the object and you choose warp. And what warp does is it turns your pixels to like jelly that you can smear around. So I can click and just smear this image around. But all I'm going to do is be subtle. I'm going to click in the top center and pull it down a little bit. And I'm going to click in the top middle and pull it down a little bit as well. So just a tiny curve. And then I'm going to also take the layer opacity down, which we didn't talk about really at all today, but over here in the layers panel, there's opacity. And I'm going to drop it to like, just like 90%, 87. And this is the gist of putting stuff together. There are things we need to do to get them to agree with each other more, but I think this is a pretty fun product in not too much time. Let's talk about saving, and then the proper workshop will be over and we'll have time for questions as well. So regular save, Command or Control S will update my Photoshop document. But let's say we want to send this to somebody. Somebody hired you to make a bear in the desert with a hat, sunglasses, and bottle. So you want to send this as a draft before you go and add shadows and highlights and kind of make it more perfect. You don't want to send them the Photoshop file. It's generally too big to email. A lot of people don't have Photoshop and it can only be opened by specific programs. So we want to export this in a different format. And to do that, there's several ways, but I like going to File, Export, Export As. When you do that, it's going to open up a nice little window here. And if you already know which format you want, you can just choose JPEG, quality from very poor to great. If you're not sure what that'll affect, it'll show you the file size here. So right now it's almost 3000 by 2000 pixels and 922 kilobytes. If I change the quality to very poor, it's going to be 380 kilobytes, but it'll have less colors, less pixels, less sharpness. And if I go to great, it's going to be 5 megabytes, which is like 6 times bigger than what we had. So generally speaking, good is more than good enough. So you have your format here. Generally, JPEG is what you want for an image. If you have something like a logo or like you want to make a bear with a cutout background that you can put into other images whenever you want, that's when you would choose PNG when we're working with photographs anyway. So JPEG is good. You can resize it here if you like. Let's say they want it to be no bigger than 2000 pixels. So I'll change the width to 2000. And when I go to the next part, it automatically resizes it. And you can see the image size now is 493. So once you're happy here, it really, generally speaking, you'll just open it and click export because it's just set to JPEG. And click export. We'll see this window and I might name it Desert Bear Composite Draft 1. I'll hit save. And if we go look in our folder, we have Desert Bear Composite, which is 41 megabytes. And we have Desert Bear Composite Draft, which is 500 kilobytes, which I don't even know the math for that. 80 times smaller? Or is it 800? Okay, so anyway, if I preview them, at face value, they look basically exactly the same. Okay, so that leaves us with 10 minutes for questions. I'm gonna